Hello. I've just been reading this absolutely incredible book, and I think after reading it, the right thing to do is to share it on a public platform. As we know it, electricity is absolutely everywhere. But the question on everyone's mind is this electricity harmful to human health? In this video, we're going to find out. First and foremost, I want to introduce the book. The name of the book is The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Fistenberg. Now, this is one of the most incredible books that you are going to read in your whole life. It is a complete eye-opener, and it will change your view on the world as you know it. That's the book right there. It all began in 1734. Electricity made its debut, the professor of physics, Pieter van Musschenbroek. Now, Pieter was taking part in an experiment, an electrical one. When he was taking part in this experiment, he was struck by the electricity. The pain was so great, he had to write a letter to his friend and tell him that he thought he died. In his own words, he thought he was done for. He cannot even express how bad the pain is in both his right arm and his whole body. Even his friend, Jean Nicolas Sebastian Allemand, took part in an experiment, and when he was struck by the electricity, he feared permanent injury. A few years later, actually a lot of years later, this was in 1762, a French botanist named Thomas Francius Dalibard, I do hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Thomas made the following statements after his experience with electricity. First, he mentioned how the electrical shocks have so strongly attacked his nervous system that he can barely bring a glass of water to his mouth. Furthermore, he mentioned that if he was struck by the electricity again, that he would no longer be able to sign a piece of paper within the next 24 hours. In addition, he also made statements that it's hard for him to do the very simple act of even closing an envelope because the injury from the electricity was so severe. Benjamin Franklin is another name that comes into mind because he wrote a book in 1752 and he brought a lot of attention to electricity, especially to the public. But even he mentioned in these following statements that when he was experimenting with the electricity and when he was near that environment, it brought him the most violent headaches. This now brings me to a German fellow who also was experimenting with electricity, and during his experiments he actually paralyzed one side of his body, not realizing that the dangers of being around that electrical environment were having a severe impact on his central nervous system and his neurological and physical function. His name is Johann Doppelmayr. I know I've completely butchered that name. As this fellow, let's just say he was oblivious to the fact that electricity is causing him severe damage. He continued to take part in the experiments, and he was a stubborn man. And eventually, after taking part in these electrical experiments in 1750, he died of a stroke just after one of his experiments. I just thought this was really important to add as well. Just going back to Benjamin Franklin, he actually developed neurological illnesses after he became more and more intense with his electrical experiments. Now, Franklin wrote a letter on the 15th of March, 1753, to his doctor describing of a pain in his head that was so unbearable that he wishes it was in his foot. He thinks in that way that he would actually be able to bear it better. This was after he was doing very, very intense research and taking part heavily in electrical experiments. People also to mention are George Beard and Alfonso Rockwell. They wrote a textbook in 1881 and devoted 10 pages talking about how there are individuals that exist who are very sensitive to electricity. They called it electrosusceptibility. This referring to those who are highly sensitive and highly damaged by these EMF and RMF waves that were being rolled out at that time. This was in 1881. And what I want to do is I just want to list a few of the symptoms that people were suffering from at that time. They were suffering from headaches, insomnia, muscle pain, overexcitation of the pulse, muscle spasms, light and sound sensitivity, metallic taste, and ringing in the ears. And those are just a few to mention. What is even more absolutely outrageous, that in September 2008 in Tokyo, a man called Hans Richner actually stood up in front of the audience and told people that just because we are using cell phones anyway, there's no way that they can be dangerous as we're using them every single day. He actually said that there was no more research to be done on electromagnetic fields and its relationship with human beings. One more disaster that absolutely occurred in 1859 was the absolute metamorphosis of electricity, when an absolute bombardment of electric wires was now brought to local areas, villages, shops. The London District Telegraph Company. They have silently, sneakily, but effectively spread 160 miles of telegraph wires over rooftops, chimneys, trees, nature, all over. The London District Telegraph Company persuaded over 3,500 property owners of this new rollout of technology to lend their rooftops as resting places for 280 miles of wire crisscrossing all over London. This systematic electrification of Europe began in 1839, and the electrification of America began only a few years later. In the year 1889, this was the year when the electrical man-made circuitry took on a global scale. In 1889, this is the year that all modern historians believe was the era of electricity. This was also around the same time that doctors in America, Asia, Europe, Australia, Africa were completely flooded and overwhelmed with ill patients because of a strange disease that completely flooded the gates of all hospitals. This just happened to be the same year that the electrical era began. The name of this mysterious disease was called influenza. This pandemic continued for 4 years and killed at least 1 million people. And the fact is not that we don't know enough about this influenza virus. The fact is that we know way more than enough. We actually found out because of scientific studies that the virus is not even contagious. We actually found out because of multiple books that have been released in the past, very previously and very recently, that contagion doesn't even exist. In 2001, a Canadian astronomer named Ken Tapping worked together with 2 British Columbia physicians, figured out and very correctly realized that the last 3 influenza pandemics were caused by magnetic shift polarities in the universe, were most likely caused by solar magnetic activity when it was at its peak. Story that I can't fail to mention is the story of Marconi, the creator of the radio. Well, the supposed creator of the radio. The real creator of the radio was actually a man called Nathan B. Stubbenfield. Marconi made the decision to erect his own needle. A tower as tall as a 12-story building was now supporting an antenna for the world's first radio station. Marconi was absolutely liberating electricity. The antenna was vibrating to 1 million cycles per second. Even as the inventor of this absolutely controversial creation, he did not stop to ask whether it was safe. Marconi, very shortly after the creation of his radio and very shortly after he started engaging with all of this electrical technology, started to suffer from fevers, temperatures, stress, high cortisol. He even married to a woman, and when he brought her to the radio station to show her his creations and show her his electrical studies and show her his electrical experimentations, just 3 months after she was experiencing this high electrical environment, she started suffering from severe jaundice. Then when she got pregnant, he took her back to London, but during the 9 months of her pregnancy, she was absolutely bombarded under the influence of many power lines and aerials and radio waves. Her baby, once she gave birth, only lived a few weeks and died of unknown causes. Marconi's health at the same time collapsed completely. He literally collapsed. For the rest of the years, his health was in a state where he was constantly suffering from delirious fevers. Between the years of 1918 and 1921, he was developing and designing shortwave equipment. During this time, his health was in the worst state. He was constantly suffering from bouts of suicidal depression. When he collapsed, he was diagnosed with severe chest pains and heart conditions. Still oblivious to the idea that electricity is dangerous, between 1934 and 1937, he was engaged and developing the microwave technology. During this time, when he was working very, very closely with the microwave technology and the electricity, he suffered from as many as 9 heart attacks. the final one being a fatal one, and he died at 63 because of unknown causes. This brings me back to another situation that I want to mention. We're going to fast forward now to 1998. Florence Griffith Joyner. Now, she was a former Olympic track gold medalist. She died in her sleep at the age of 38 because her heart stopped beating. Another athlete to mention is a man named Stéphane Morin, a Canadian ice hockey player. At age 29, he died of a sudden heart failure during the middle of the game. Dave Logan is another athlete to throw into the mix. Now, Dave Logan died the same reason that these other two athletes died, but one very important thing to mention is that none of these athletes had any history of illnesses or heart problems. Because of these sudden deaths and cardiac arrests occurrences that were taking place, the Minneapolis Heart Institute Foundation created a national registry of sudden deaths in athletes. This was through public records, news reports, hospital archives, autopsy records. The conclusion came down to this company registered 1,049 American athletes in 38 competitive sports who had all suffered cardiac arrest between the years of 1980 and 2006. In 1980, heart attacks in young athletes was very rare, but it only began to double in 1996. That's when it became 64 athletes per year, 66 athletes per year, and then it rose to 76 athletes per year. All of these people died because their heart gave out and under cardiac arrest. And most of these athletes were under 18 years of age, very young. The American medical community had absolutely no answers for this thing that was occurring during this time. But on October 9th, 2002, it was a group of German doctors that figured out the cause and made the connection between electromagnetic radiation and the human health. And they found out, and they called for a monitorization of antennas and towers used for mobile phone telecommunications. The Germans discovered that it was electromagnetic radiation that was causing an astronomical rise in both acute and chronic diseases. The Germans knew that electromagnetic radiation had a huge connection with extreme fluctuations in blood pressure, heart rhythm disorders, heart attacks, and strokes. And I noticed that this was becoming very prevalent in the younger generation. The Germans' analysis, if correct, would explain this doubling of heart attacks occurring in 1996. The heart attacks were extremely popular in American athletes. Now remember, this was in 1996. 1996 was the year, just happened to be the year where digital cell phones became absolutely prominent and ubiquitous. They were sold absolutely everywhere, in every single shop and every single retailer. This also just happened to be the year that cell phone companies began building tens and thousands of cell towers all over the country. And we do recall earlier when I was talking about Marconi, the founder of the radio, suffering from 9 heart attacks just after he began putting himself and immersing himself in the environment of RMF technology. Arthur Fistenberg, then, the writer of this book, met with another doctor who's just a great guy. He's called Dr. Samuel Milham. Now, Samuel Milham is the author of one of the most phenomenal books on electricity that you will ever read in your life. It's called Dirty Electricity, but we'll make another video for that. The main point is that Dr. Samuel Milham was absolutely agreeing with Fistenberg. He agreed that diseases and pandemics were caused mostly and entirely by electricity alone. Then, to make matters worse, Billy Boy Clinton signed a deal on February the 8th saying that nobody is allowed to regulate the electricity on a basis of health. That means if somebody wanted to sue an electrical company, it would be absolutely impossible because there was no law that was giving them the eligibility to move forward with that. Good old Billy Boy Clinton, just making matters worse. Bill Clinton was literally saying that every single human being in America and all over the world should just feel comfortable holding a cell phone, a wireless cell phone in their hand, which is emitting microwave radiation, and telling people that they should all feel comfortable with massive cell phone towers and antennas and microwave cables all over America. Basically what he was saying was, whether you like it or not, we are going to roll out this technology and you are all the guinea pigs. And we were just a part of some monumentally evil experimentation. Diving a bit deeper into the work of Samuel Milham, he was proving that people like telephone workers, electricians, power line workers, aluminum workers, and TV repairmen, and many other people who were in the environment of electricity, people who were far more engaged with electromagnetic radiation, died far more earlier than members of the general public. Just to put a finish to this video, I just want to mention a few major events that took place directly after a new rollout of technology. 1889. This is when power line harmonic radiation began. In that year, the natural magnetic frequency and resonance of the Earth was directly altered. And that very same year just happened to be the same year where the rise of a brand new influenza pandemic occurred. In 1918, this is the year the radio era began. This was the beginning of building hundreds of powerful radio stations, very low frequency towers, and low frequency towers. These were 100% altering and disturbing the natural magnetic resonance of the Earth. 1918 was also the year of the Spanish influenza pandemic. In 1957, the radar era began. It began by building hundreds of powerful, early warning radar stations which completely cluttered, altered, and littered the upper hemisphere of the Earth with synthetic electrical technology. This was just the bombardment and the absolute hurling and throwing of microwave energy all throughout the hemisphere. 1957 also just happened to be the year of the Asian flu pandemic. Furthermore, in 1968, the satellite era began. Beginning of this was the launch of just dozens and dozens of satellites up into the hemisphere and into the magnetosphere. And what a surprise, this was ushered in by the Hong Kong flu pandemic of 1968. Brings me to the most recent event, epidemic of our history. In 2019, Wuhan, China. This was one of the first countries to roll out 5th generation, or as we know it, 5G technology, releasing about a grid of at least 10,000 5G base stations all over China. After this catastrophic rollout of new technology, then began the C-19 pandemic. That will be all for today's video. I hope you all have a great day.